A 2-year-old sits in a high chair, mouth open for the next bite, eyes locked on a phone propped against the ketchup bottle. Across the table, a mother who swore she'd never do this scrolls her own phone, grateful for the 10 minutes of silence. Neither one is the villain here. Something else is happening in that silence. You know this scene. Maybe you've lived it as the parent, phone in hand, telling yourself it's just this once. Maybe you grew up as that kid, and now you wonder what those hours actually did to you. Either way, you're not here to be shamed. You're here because some part of you already suspects there's more going on than too much screen time is bad. And you're right. Maybe you've Googled it at midnight, half panicked, half defensive, looking for someone to either let you off the hook or finally explain what's really happening. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly what's happening inside that small skull and why it's not as simple as good parent versus bad parent. Here's where it gets interesting. A child's brain under 3 years old is in a state scientists call heightened neuroplasticity, meaning it's wiring itself faster than it ever will again in life, forming roughly 1 million new neural connections every second. Researchers tracking toddlers found that higher screen use was linked to fewer back-and-forth conversations between adult and child, fewer sounds the child made in response, and less overall exposure to spoken words. Think about what that means. The brain isn't just watching a show, it's quietly deciding what kind of brain to become based on what it's fed. Picture a garden where every conversation, every face-to-face moment is a seed. A screen doesn't water those seeds, it just lights up the soil and walks away. There's a second piece here, and it's the one that surprised researchers the most. A long-term study out of Singapore, tracking the same children for more than a decade with repeated brain scans, found that infants with higher screen exposure before age 2 developed certain brain networks earlier than expected, specifically the ones tied to visual processing and cognitive control. That sounds like a good thing. Early development, ahead of the curve. It isn't. That premature specialization came with a cost. Those same children took longer to make decisions on a thinking task by age 8, suggesting their brains had lost some flexibility along the way. And here's the part that should make every parent pause. Slower decision-making at 8 was connected to higher anxiety symptoms by age 13. A toddler's brain isn't a sponge that just soaks things up harmlessly. It's more like wet cement. Whatever presses into it early sets the shape for years. So what's actually happening, mechanically, when a toddler stares at a screen for hours? It's not that the brain shuts off, it's that the brain over-specializes too soon, like a kid who picks one position in soccer at age 4 and never learns to play any other spot on the field. Efficient, maybe. Flexible, no. There's a third concept worth understanding here, and psychologists call it displacement. It's a simple idea once you hear it. Every hour a toddler spends on a screen is an hour not spent doing something else, not stacking blocks badly, not narrating a stuffed animal's imaginary feud, not pointing at a dog and waiting for you to say the word dog back. Researchers studying this exact pattern found that toddlers with more screen exposure tended to get less time in parent-led play, fewer shared moments reading books together, and less of the kind of pretend play that builds problem-solving skills. None of those activities look like learning while they're happening. They look like a mess on the living room floor. But that mess is doing more for a developing brain than almost anything on a screen ever could, because it's slow, it's clumsy, and it requires the brain to build its own pictures instead of receiving someone else's. Here's the analogy that makes it click. Imagine a muscle that only ever lifts the same 5-pound weight. It gets efficient at exactly that motion, but ask it to lift something heavier or move in a new direction, and it has no idea what to do. A screen-heavy childhood can train a brain the same way, efficient at fast, bright, predictable stimulation, and undertrained at the slow, ambiguous, effortful thinking that real life actually demands. There's one more thing worth naming, and it's the hardest one to hear. Psychologists studying media exposure in early childhood describe a pattern where children grow accustomed to a certain pace of stimulation, fast cuts, bright colors, constant reward, and the real world, by comparison, starts to feel unbearably slow. A picture book doesn't change scenes every 2 seconds. A sibling doesn't always respond the instant you want them to. A toddler whose brain has been calibrated to screen speed can find ordinary life genuinely harder to tolerate, not because anything is wrong with them, but because their nervous system has been trained on a different rhythm entirely. That's the science. Now, here's the part nobody tells you. This isn't about evil parents. It's not about lazy ones either. You reached for the phone because you were drowning, because dinner needed to get made, because the baby was crying and the toddler was crying, and you have exactly one set of hands. That's not failure, that's survival. The shame you've been carrying isn't protecting your kid, it's just making you tired in a different way. Guilt has never once made a dinner cook faster or a toddler nap longer. It just sits on your chest at 2 a.m. doing nothing useful at all. If you've ever felt that gut punch of guilt watching your toddler zone out on a screen, hit subscribe, because we're about to talk about what actually helps, and it's not what you think. Now, the nuance, because this isn't black and white, researchers have also found that parent-child reading can counteract some of these brain changes. Among children whose parents read to them often around age 3, the link between early screen exposure and altered brain development was significantly weaker. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this video. A screen that replaces connection is corrosive. A screen that's sandwiched between conversation, eye contact, and a parent narrating the world out loud is a different animal entirely. So ask yourself, is the screen filling a gap, or is it the only thing filling the day? Because one is a tool, the other is a babysitter wearing a tool's face. The same 30 minutes of cartoons can mean two completely different things for two completely different households, depending on everything that happens around it. Don't sit in that distinction too long, though. The point isn't to audit every minute of last week. The point is what happens going forward, starting today, in this house, with this kid. Here's what's actually true. Your toddler's brain is not broken because of the hours already logged. It is not too late, and it never was about achieving 0 screen time, because that goal was never realistic for anyone living an actual life with actual bills and actual exhaustion. What changes a developing brain is not one missed afternoon. It's the pattern, stretched across years, of whether a small human spent most of their early life being talked to or mostly being shown things. You get to shift that pattern this week. Not perfectly, just differently. The 2-year-old in the high chair isn't doomed. He's just waiting for someone to look up first. You don't need a parenting overhaul. You don't need to throw the phone in a drawer and white-knuckle your way through every meal from now on. You just need a few more minutes of eye contact than yesterday, a few more words spoken out loud even when no one's listening back yet. That's it. That's the whole intervention, and it costs nothing but attention you already have buried somewhere under the exhaustion. A brain that gets seen grows differently than a brain that gets parked. So tell me, are you the parent who's going to put the phone down at dinner starting tonight, or are you the one who thinks this whole conversation is overblown hand-wringing? Drop it in the comments, because this gets heated every single time. And if you want to know what's happening to the adult brain that's been raised this way, the one scrolling next to the high chair right now, the next video on child psychology is going to feel a lot more personal than this one. You'll want to watch it before you watch anything else today.